Welcome to Return to Roots, a Mil2Vet podcast where the veteran community shares their experiences during transition by narrating their stories
and highlighting the resources that shaped their journey to a successful reintegration into the community.
Ring the bell to stay up to date and follow us on all social media.
Attention, mature audience, listener discretion is advised.
Return to Roots podcast. Welcome. Today, we're going to bring you a Marine Corps veteran. As they say, once a Marine, always a Marine, right? They still like crayons, as far as I've been told. But we'll ask our guest, and we will continue going forward. She is an amazing LinkedIn influencer and has an amazing story. Without further ado, Tab Bartley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You don't have to take those little punches from that little guy over there, all right? Hey, Tab, we really do appreciate you coming on the show and hanging out with us. First off, how can people get a hold of you?
So I am on LinkedIn. You can look up Tab Bartley or hashtag Blunt Bartley, as well as on the rest of the platforms. You can find me by the Oath We Took podcast.
The Oath We Took podcast. All right, guys. Hey, take a listen to her content. Follow her on LinkedIn. And also, don't forget to subscribe to Mil2Vet. We need your guys' help. Subscribe to Mil2Vet. All right, Tab, what kind of books do you recommend? Books, media, content, do you recommend our listeners that are transitioning in their military transition or any kind of transition? What do you recommend them to digest?
So I don't have a book because I love books like not reality book platforms, but one of my favorite podcasts is actually not a military podcast, but the Recruiting Hell podcast is a great resource even outside of the military. Although the podcast no longer has new episodes, it is a great resource with so much knowledge. I think that, at least for me, was so helpful because it's not specific to military, but just so much knowledge of like not knowing what you don't know. My transition out of the Marine Corps was not a smooth transition by any means. So for me, that was probably one of the biggest resources I had. So the Recruiting Hell is a great resource.
Interesting. So you did 8 years in the Marine Corps, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if you could go back in time and talk to that young lady before she joined the Marine Corps? What advice would you give her to be successful during her career in the military?
I never considered joining the Marine Corps. I was reached out by a recruiter after high school and never had a plan to join the Marine Corps. It was the more that I learned about the Marine Corps, I realized that it was the right place for me, for my personality. And I don't think I really have anything I would have changed in regard to joining the Marine Corps. There's not anything I would change, but if I really had advice to give, I wish that I had I wish that I had dropped my pack sooner. I wish that I had taken the time to be more concerned about myself. I was working literally the day before my end of service. And so I think that's the biggest advice that I would give, that at some point you have to drop your pack and you have to start thinking about yourself and preparing for your transition out of the Marine Corps. And for me, it was something that was really hard for me to do.
So with that, what advice would you give a transitioning service member, right? As just like you, I think honestly we have that big mindset that the world's gonna come to an end if we stop working and we stop taking care of ourselves, or start taking care of ourselves, not start taking care of ourselves, stop taking and devoting all that energy to the rest of the chain of command, to the rest of whatever mission we're fulfilling at the time. What advice would you give to that transitioning service member, and how early so that they're successful during their reintegration?
Honestly, like at least a year, 6 months out, depending. I was told that the Marine Corps could replace me, and it was really hard because at first it was like, well, didn't feel like the Marine Corps could. Not that I felt special, but I just felt like my role mattered so much. But the reality is it's easy to replace us. And that's really hard, I think, in the transition to admit that, the military is going to find your replacement. As much and as value as we are and as much of an impact we have, the reality is they're going to be able to replace us. And so it's hard, at least for me, it was really hard to admit that I needed to be concerned about myself and that I had to advocate for myself. It was just a lot easier to advocate for other people, right? For me, it was really hard to be an advocate for myself. And I wish that I had dropped my pack sooner. I wish that I had been more concerned about not even the impact that I had to experience, but what my family had to experience. And so I think that's something that I don't feel like we tell each other enough, that like it's time to drop the pack. It's time to be concerned about what you need to do to get out. And so it's hard, but that's probably the biggest advice I have to give, because at some point you got to move on, right? You got to think of what the next steps are going to be.
I think with that also, we feel guilty. And, we always say peer pressure is a huge thing, can be positive or negative, right? If someone else is pulling their weight and you start taking care of yourself post-military, you feel, oh, I'm really letting all of my shipmates down. And especially if you're in a position of leadership, right, which you were, you're like, oh, well, I'm setting the wrong example. I can't do this. I have to keep on going. And then, one of the funniest things that I saw, and I follow him, Grant. He posted, "Why do we take advice from active duty service members that haven't transitioned?" Right? It literally is like, well, just keep on working hard. You're gonna do it. It's gonna be great. You don't need to prepare. You're gonna be fantastic. And then you walk out that door, and then you just fall flat on your face. And I mean, you did everything you could. You listened to them. You prepared. You thought, but then it's awkward.
And
It's like leading the blind almost,
Yeah. And it's super hard. Like, my transition, I was told 2 days before my end of service that I wasn't being held. I wish that nobody experienced a transition like I did, because I had no idea that was going to happen. I physically couldn't stand for more than a few minutes without severe pain. I was mentally struggling so hard. And I put in a congressional inquiry in because I didn't know what else to do. And my elected officials didn't do the job that they were supposed to. And then it became a point that it's like, I literally have to figure out how to survive. My husband left the Navy so that I could stay in the Marine Corps. And then next thing you know, I can't physically operate yet. I'm, the one who has the money for the family. My husband sacrificed this life to allow me to stay in the Marine Corps. And then I physically can't handle being in the Marine Corps. And now I have to figure out how to move to Indiana, find a job. It was extremely hard. And I don't like to say that I was suicidal, but I understood how transition can result in that. The level of a burden that I felt from that, I wouldn't wish that on anybody at all.
And, getting to that point, it gets a really visceral reaction feeling that you probably were experiencing. And it's a frustrating elephant that's figuratively and literally in the room when you start transitioning, that transitioning elephant. And if you just try to take that elephant on out as soon as you get out, even if you're at 6 months, you're still kind of behind, because it's a lot of stuff to take on. The elephant it's big. It's not going nowhere. And when you are out the door and you're no longer collecting a paycheck on the 1st and the 15th, the elephant's either going to step on you or you're going to jump on that sucker and ride off. But how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Yes, one bite at a time. And that's why And that's why we strongly recommend with our Mil2Vet tribe that's listening, we strongly recommend 24 months out, just a little bit. You should be thinking about it. You should be writing it down. You should be plotting your path. It's not a bad thing to start thinking about transition 24 months out. What's a bad thing is starting at 6 months from getting out, and then you don't know what you don't know, and then you find out that you missed all these opportunities that you'll never get back because guess what? You're past your time.
And
One
I
thing
think
I would like to mention before we get any further, in case anybody's going through a crisis right now, the suicide prevention hotline is 988. That's the national shortcut number. We'll be also providing that in the intro. It is something that we do struggle with, and we've had that conversation here in Mil2Vet multiple times. I can say I have had suicidal ideations for over 18 years. So thankfully, I was able to get help. I'm still here. So yeah, that's it's a huge topic. I don't want to take away from what you're saying or anything like that. I just needed to make sure that we address that sooner rather than later.
I agree. And I think I have had good and bad experience when it comes to the VA too. I know like it's easy to hear a lot of negative, but for me, my husband has helped with a lot of advocacy for me in going through cognitive therapy with the VA and therapy through the VA. I have been blessed with two providers that were just absolutely amazing when it came to finding these resources and being able to take a holistic approach. For me, that has been such a big part of it. It's not just mental health, it's not just physical health, it's this combination of all of these things. And there are so many resources, but I try and encourage anybody to not let just one bad experience mean that they don't utilize the VA as a service. It's just sometimes you do have to find the right person, and I know how frustrating it can be and how hard it can be and how disheartening it can be, but there are some absolutely amazing resources and amazing providers within the VA.
With the VA, it's kind of sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 4 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but you're always progressing, but you got it. It's painful, and I'm learning that too right now. And you know, you sound very blessed because you have a husband that understands what you were going through to an extent. The Navy and the Marine Corps are 2 different animals whenever you're transitioning. I do think that the Marine Corps does some things right, but I also think that the Navy does some things right too. So I think what's really important though is to sit down and just realize that it's okay to have those overwhelming feelings. It's okay to have that. What's not okay is to not do anything about it. And if you find yourself in those kind of situations, we even have tools here. Yogi mentioned the crisis hotline. MYTT 365 app is an application that's going to help you through your transition. That's why we put it up here on the top corner of the screen, so that way people understand that there's tools out there for them to use. One thing I want to know is, when you got out, what was it that helped you find that transitioning mindset?
For me, it was really hard because I didn't think that the civilian sector could handle me. I found my authentic self in the Marine Corps, and although I found a great place and a great environment at Purdue University, I was almost kind of a negative because I didn't think that they could handle me. And as I started looking at taking more of a holistic health approach, so looking at my mental health, looking at what type of food I was eating, looking at biocraniosacral therapy, looking at non-invasive tools to look at that whole marine, that whole person concept, was a massive impact for my journey. And, you know, I got out in October of 2018. I'm still working on that transition, right? I still wouldn't say that my transition is complete by any means, but I have slowly found resources and tools that have helped for me, and realized that there is a place for me in the civilian sector, and I can be my authentic self and who and what I found myself in the Marine Corps can carry through to the civilian sector as well. And for me, it was also a lot of I didn't want anybody to go through what I did, and that was a super driving force. You know, it led me to running for Indiana State Senate. It had me doing things in my community that I didn't initially had a plan to do, but nobody was doing these things. And so I felt like somebody needed to provide these resources and that there needed to be this place. And specifically, I had no idea my gender was going to matter so much. My experience was unique in the Marine Corps that my gender was a positive almost the entire time I was in the Marine Corps. However, when I got out of the Marine Corps, it was a negative. People felt some type of way, some very type of way about gender. And I had never experienced that in my 8 years in the Marine Corps. And so I realized that there was a lot that I needed to provide and was able to provide in my community, even as simple as just creating a safe place for other female veterans to find a place that they could talk about their struggles, you know, especially when it comes to multiple organ prolapses and other health challenges that females face that tend to be taboo topics that people don't feel comfortable talking about. And so in my transition, I learned the more that I refused to stay silent, the easier my transition felt, the more control I felt like I had over it.
That's a great perspective, especially you have a perspective on your transition that I don't have. So that's interesting. What was it that really made you feel and notice that was like a big deal? What was it that? Can you give a story on that?
I think the first was I thought, you know, when I was in the Marine Corps, I had multiple hip surgeries. I had multiple different health challenges throughout my time in the Marine Corps. And when I got injured with multiple organ prolapses, it felt like I couldn't talk about it. And I didn't know how to operate because up until this point, you know, when you have physical challenges in the military, at least in the Marine Corps, it's public. It's something you talk about. Your support system wants to know how you are. You're very much there. But having multiple organ prolapses was something that people didn't know how to react. It made them very uncomfortable. They didn't know what to say. And it started to keep me silent. And as I was transitioning out and was fighting to get care and fighting to find solutions to it, I started talking about it. And then I started meeting female veterans of like Vietnam era and, you know, past veterans who had all gone through these same physical struggles. And as they started talking about their struggles, I realized that I wasn't alone. And that right there just had such a huge impact of not feeling like I was the only one who was going through it. I don't even know if I can really explain how much that an impact that had, but I can just say how like much that was just life changing to not feel like I was alone in that journey because I didn't experience that in the Marine Corps. I absolutely love my time in the Marine Corps. I never felt alone. You didn't feel these negatives, and so it was really hard transitioning, feeling like I was alone, and then getting to hear other people's stories, and then it was like I'm not alone, and then hearing, you know, as corny as this is, but a safe place to be because initially for me, veteran spaces were not safe spaces. It was negative. It was very much Blunt Bartley came out again as where there was kind of this time where I was not in that role. And I realized, no, I have the capacity. I can handle this and I can do that. And I can bring that personality to the space. And sometimes you got to kind of call people out. Sometimes it's all they need, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey.
I absolutely love it.
With that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what you just said, right? I just recently, because of some of the struggles that I'm currently going through and everything like that, it was a book that was recommended, The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. If you haven't, recommend it. However, with the connotation of be ready to basically be punched in the face emotionally. I just started reading it. I'm like halfway through. And then, but one of the things that it mentions, and it kind of opens up the book with it, is that the veteran community does not have a safe space until we do, until we make it. And right. And then once we break that barrier, it is unlike any other community out there. We have this amazing resource And I mean, we can talk about different traumas and different traumatic events that we've lived. It's nothing because it's amongst us, and it really is, as you mentioned, the blunt barley coming out, and it's therapeutic, whereas no one else or any other community can do that. And it was fascinating. This is a Harvard uh, doctor, psychologist, whatever, that talks about that, and it was beautiful to hear that. Very inspirational.
And I'm a member of the Marine Corps League, my local chapter. And when I moved, before I even moved to Virginia, that Commandant, and I had no plans to move to Virginia at the time. And the Commandant, I posted something, I don't even remember what it was about, but I was a very big Blunt Bartley moment and talking about, you know, people's opinions of safe spaces and how much my gender played a role in all of these things. And got a bunch of like negative feedback that I was not expecting. Oh, I talked about the things I accomplished while I was pregnant in the Marine Corps. And I got so many people who were like, oh, you got pregnant to not deploy. You used pregnancy as a way to get out of things. And I'm sitting here like, I wasn't even at a place that I could deploy. Furthermore, the things that I accomplished while I was pregnant, not bragging, but like I did so much while I was pregnant. I multiple NAMs, multiple recognitions. I created first of their kind programs while I was pregnant. And for people who didn't know me to feel like they had a right to bash me and say these things, I wasn't expecting that. But the Commandant in the local Marine Corps League was one of those champions who I'd never met, never interacted with, who was like coming to my defense and was just like, whoa, hold yourself, calm yourself, just to find, a year and a half later that, oh, I was moving to this area, and they reached out and they were like, hey, no pressure. We would love you to, come to one of our meetings. Right. And it's like, here is a safe place when, I've tried to interact with these other veteran organizations, and it was just like, yeah, no, thank you. Guess this isn't for me. To then a bunch of, they're going to listen to this. Don't tell them I said this, but a bunch of older male veterans who you wouldn't think, right, would be there with open arms. And the first meeting I go to, they're just like, we love what you do. We love to have you. And yeah, we don't let anybody call people, we don't let female Marines be called honey or like these types of things. We're just like, yeah, we don't allow that type of stuff. We're very respectful and so on and so forth. And it was just like, wow, like you were saying, there is these safe spaces, and they are so impactful. And I don't know why people feel such type of way about safe spaces, but that's what they should be. As a veteran, we don't all need to agree on the same things, but we should feel safe. And that should be what these veteran organizations work on. We don't need to agree on things, but we still need to be the support system and this safe space to each other.
I want to plug everybody in on this. The Veteran Crisis Line. The Veteran Crisis Line connects veterans in crisis and their families and friends with qualified, caring veteran affairs responders through confidential toll-free hotline and online chat. Veterans and their families and friends can call 1-800-273-8255 and press 1 chat line, or send a text message to 838-255 to receive confidential support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. All right. Hey, look, I love this because you talk about how whenever we're going through our transition and we're going through all this different processes where we're kind of relearning everything, we need that safe space. I don't really want to call it a safe space though, because it's not all unicorns and rainbows inside of that space. We're still in there. We're giving each other crap. In fact, actually, if they're not giving each other crap, I feel like it's not a good space. So if you're listening to this and you think that we want unicorns, rainbows, and everybody just to get along, that's not what we're talking about. We need a place where we're respected, a respect place, a veteran respect space. I don't know. Someone coined a phrase out there. I'm sure Yogi's working on it right now. But what was it that when you got out, what was it that helped you find your purpose?
I think that my biggest driving force is that I didn't want anybody to experience the things that I experienced. I didn't want people to feel alone. I was so scared of dying. Horrified of dying, yet I still felt like a burden. I still thought and questioned whether or not people would be better without me. And I didn't want anybody to experience anything like that. And I specifically, in Indiana and when I ran for office, it was, being honest, a lot of people talk like they support veterans, but they don't actually. They're all for saying they do, but it's a dog and pony show. There are easy things that could be done, especially, in Indiana on the state level, that just weren't being done. There are, things like Veteran Day celebration that for some reason we have non-veterans being the spokesperson, or more concerned about veterans with certain ranks. And I am just very much of the mindset that it is not about that. And I think that everybody's story is unique and matters. And it is about the oath that we took and the willingness that we were all willing to give our lives. Whether or not we did, we were willing to. And there is a perception and these preconceived notions of what it means to serve. And I feel like I have the ability to help people challenge those perceptions in a way that it's worth having those conversations with people. It's worth, demanding those type of things. And so that's where I felt like I have been able to, for whatever reason, have these uncomfortable conversations with people and to talk about these things and to oftentimes call people out in moments and things where and maybe it's because it's not that I'm offended and it's not that I feel some type of way about it. It's just, I think sometimes you have to hold people accountable. And again, I'm just one of those people that oftentimes people say that they support veterans, but they're not. That's the reality of it, especially when we're talking people in politics and that type of stuff, because there's a lot of dog and pony shows.
So would you ever think about running back for office?
Probably not. I had no desire to ever run for office. It was just, it happened because there were a lot of things that Indiana wasn't doing that they should do. Specifically, Indiana, a lot of rural veterans, a lot of veterans who don't have access to the VA. Indiana specifically, women veteran have it's like a 90% chance they're more likely to commit suicide if they're not involved in the VA healthcare system at all. And Indiana specifically has like 32,000 female veterans who have no interaction with the VA system because of the negative experience and all of these things. And so for me, it was very much, I need to be vocal, and we need people who are comfortable being vocal and people who are not having a loyalty to a party, not having a loyalty to these things, instead having actual initiatives and change that needs to happen. But I have zero desire to be in politics. I never wanted to be in politics then either, but I also wasn't going to not push for change. And I'm currently a federal employee, which, that changes things too. As a federal employee, you can't run for politics, which perfectly fine for that. But I have been blessed that the Department of Agriculture has an amazing veteran employee organization and is really being proactive on recruiting and retaining veterans and creating resource for veterans, and also like bridging gaps, because that's the other thing. I don't think that we need to be in these individual silos of just veterans. We also need to bridge these gaps. We also need to make sure that we're interacting with civilians and people who don't know things and don't know things about the military. And so I have no desire to run for politics by any means, but happy to call people and things out, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. One thing that I want to mention, that was actually one of the first reasons why you came across my radar, is you were talking about sharing resources for our veteran or soon to be veterans, transitioning service members. There was a job posting that came up, and you are extremely active when it comes to that. And I want to give you kudos for that. Thank you, seriously. And one thing that I think we kind of just completely flew by, right? You mentioned that you finished your military career earlier because I would assume you went through a med board. Is that correct?
I actually did not get the opportunity. So I was supposed to be on medical board. So I was injured. I did the rucking raiders and I ended up in the emergency room with multiple organ prolapses. And then it took about 7 months of fighting TRICARE, trying to get confirmation of what was wrong with me, and was supposed to be medically held, but was told 2 days before my end of service by the doctor who did the eval that I was told that it wasn't life or death. Plenty of women live with it, and the VA could fix me. And so it then took me months of fighting the VA to get the care I needed, because you don't just
Right.
you don't
Yeah.
just the care. So yeah, I actually did not get medically. One day I'll fight to try and get that fixed, but I had a traumatic experience after being diagnosed with PTSD and then trying to put a claim in so that I could always get the mental health I needed. And instead of the provider talking about the incidences, they focused on what I experienced in childhood and completely ignored the traumatic incidences in the military. And so it left me very much outside of the VA and outside of things because at the time I just couldn't handle it. So yeah, I did not get to go on medical board.
I did see that a recent post that came across from you that you were talking about that, and that service members should not be penalized for whatever happened before the military, so that they can get the care and the help that they need. And I fully agree with that. It's even just from my own research recently, from trying to, what do they say? The best researchers are the ones that are trying to fix themselves, right? So, or the best, you know what I'm trying to say. Anyways, with that, it is very difficult because if you don't get the care that you need as soon and as fast as possible, that's how that number that we always talk about, that they say is 22, they coined it at 22, but arguably is double and or triple that number, and magically no one is doing about that, any advertisement or any awareness of that. But it is because we're not able to get that support immediately as we need it, right? Or we have that stigma, or we get chastised by everybody else because everybody else is afraid of going down that path, because once you go down that path, there's no coming back, right? Or at least we feel that way. And we've seen it. We've all seen it where, today we have, normally I would say a sailor, right? But we have this service member who is a super motivated and the most performing individual in whatever work atmosphere, right? Whether you call it a battalion or squadron, regiment, whatever. And then the next day, boom, something happens and start becoming a problem. Instead of just trying to be the regulator or the enforcer, we should try to find what made this service member go from super fantabulous to what's going on. There's always a trigger, right? Unfortunately, we don't always have the emotional intelligence to be able to have that response from our chain of commands. But I really do appreciate you, and I'll say this again. You couldn't tell I'm a huge admirer of what you say and how you say it, right? Of what you're doing and the awareness that you're bringing, because it does matter. It matters a lot. We actually have one of our podcast members. We won't mention her by name, but she knows who she is, and she is a huge advocate for women veterans to get the care that they need and the resources, because of all the hoops and loops that you have to jump through. As a guy, I'm still in, for the record, for everybody that is listening to this, and I'll hopefully be retiring this year. I am going through a med board myself, but the first doctor that I met, his answer was like, "Hey, chief, just you don't need to go through this med board. Just deal with it on the outside. The VA is fantastic. They're better than us. You're gonna have better care, less friction. Just put in your papers and get out and take care of it over there." Had Chris not been here, had other service members that I know not be going through the same issues, I would have been a fool and actually followed that path. I am extremely happy, and I feel, aside from all of the dramatic things that a med board brings and all of the things that when I get to your shoes, I would love to be able to change the process because it is dirtier than muddy water, right? That process is not a one shoe fits all, right? And it shouldn't be, but it's a one shoe fits all, but nobody knows where that shoe is. But with that, right, we get all this advice, and again, the leading the blind, a professional doctor, your caregiver, telling you and giving you the advice of just get out, and it happens to more service members that I care to mention, and it's very sad.
And two, I think so many of us don't know that we don't have to be alone for any of these appointments. You
Yep.
can bring somebody with you, and I advise you to not go to a single appointment ever alone. Whether that is a VSO who goes with you, whether that's your husband, whether that's a friend, there is no reason for you to be alone in any of those appointments because it is just hard as a veteran, and it seems to be across the board, to advocate for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason for you to. And so that's something I very much encourage people to know, that like in this journey, you are not alone. You don't need to go to these appointments alone, and you don't need to do these things alone.
I love it,
Thank you for saying
guys.
that.
I love it. Before we go to the end, do you have any final rounds?
I think the biggest thing is that, again, challenging that perception of what it means to serve, and acknowledging that it is the oath that we take as veterans, and that is such an important thing, and that all of our stories are so unique, and yet there is this community and there is this support, and you are not alone, and your life matters so much. And as you know, I always say that for me, transitioning out of the Marine Corps was the most physically and mentally and physically challenging time of my life. But you're not alone, and you're not a burden, and your life is so worth it. And so anybody who's going through that transition, do not hesitate to ask for support. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me. I am more than happy in supporting however I can, and or helping find resources.
Tab, I feel like we only scratched not even the tip of the iceberg, right? We would like to bring you back to talk more and share more about your experiences and your wisdom. We got a little dark, and I apologize to our audience and also to you. That was not even the intent of where this conversation was supposed to go. But seriously, we appreciate you. We thank you for being on the show. We thank you for coming in. Before you get off the show, or not before, because that'll stop us right now. As soon as you get off the show, please come back. I cannot ask you enough. Come back, and we'll talk about something a little bit more lighthearted, hearted. So yeah.
Yeah, Tab, thank you for coming on. All right, to our listeners that are out there, Bartley came out and told us about her transition. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. Remember, it is your transition, so take charge of it. Mil2Vet out.
As we wrap up this compelling episode of Return to Roots, our heartfelt reminder echoes through our conversation. If you or someone you know is facing challenges, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24/7. Dial 988. Your life is important, and help is just a call away.
And before we sign off, a special mention for our transitioning service members. Explore the MYTT 365 app, a valuable resource tailored to support you on your journey from the military to civilian life. With guidance, community, and tools, it is here to make your transition smoother. Remember, you are not alone. Take that courageous step forward. Thank you for being with us on Return to Roots. Stay strong, stay connected, and always move forward.
Support the Mil2Vet community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more engaging content.
Ring the bell and stay connected. Stay updated, following us on all of our social media platforms.